Thank you, Joaquin, for coming to this podcast. This is the second time we do it. I'm sorry for making you redo it, but yeah, I think that the last one, um, I felt like I didn't know too much about what I was saying, so hopefully this is a little redo on my part. But thank you for joining me for another hour of this talk.
Yeah, yeah, of course, man. It's my pleasure.
All right, so I brought you here because off camera we have a lot of talks about politics, and we also have a lot of talks about not just I guess like a real world politics, but we also talk a lot about theoretical politics and things around that. You also know a lot about philosophy. So I guess I wanted to get your opinion on a lot of things. And starting off, because this whole COVID pandemic has been, well, huge for like the past over a year now, and now we all have not access to, but now there are vaccines that are being created and distributed. We already have a way to fight back. I want to talk about intellectual property for a second. And for those of you unaware, intellectual property is the idea of copyright, patents, trade secrets, trademarks. Essentially, if you make something, uh, an intellectual property, right, something that is not tangible, that you get to own it for a certain amount of time, and other people cannot recreate it or copy it and sell it. So yes, I wanted to start this by talking about patents, since that's such an important thing. What are your views on patents and relating to COVID?
Right. So I think that the patents are like um, a way of keeping private laboratories or like other like private companies, I would say, and on creating or utilizing the formula that has been like made by the laboratories to be able to make the vaccines and sell them like privately. Although I think that the problem with this is that we first need to discuss if private properties, like if rather intellectual property is even a thing in the first place, you know? So because um, is it an actual thing? Is it material or is it just a concept? Because like intellectual property just works in the case where you wanna, I mean, protect something that you would have been released, like you wouldn't have released into the market in the first place. So by releasing something into the market, such as the vaccines, well, in the case of like like a private competition, you would be saying like a lot of companies would be competing to get the vaccines as distributed as much as possible. Then the patents released would mean that they will have the access to this competition, right? I think
Right.
that having the patents and just like making the government protect the this is just violating its the right to a free market because it's not allowing other companies to base their information around what's going on, and it's censoring this information around so many opportunities that may come for companies to produce these vaccines, right?
Definitely. I think my greatest, I guess, like grudge or gripe against intellectual property as a whole is that it is. I wouldn't consider it a property right. If anything, I think that it harms property rights as a whole, because I think property rights are the basis of what we can do with material, tangible possessions, right? So intellectual property essentially makes every single person that creates an idea onto the world, it gives them co-ownership of every single person that is alive's private property, right? So if I create an idea, I now get to tell you that you cannot use your material possessions to create my intangible possession, my
I
intangible
think that we can
idea.
link that as well to like in the I kind of want to link it to the music case because like sometimes a lot of artists will say like, no, I made this melody, you cannot use it. But like some artists have used a lot of the ideas, melodies, rhythms that a lot of people say that are copyrighted, and they just use it for like a background, and then like they would add vocals or something inside like on it, and then like they would get a lawsuit for it. Like why should they get a lawsuit if everyone already knows it's the song from a previous person owner? um if it wasn't specified of who it was, it still wouldn't matter because the product is the same essentially. And by limiting what you can use and what you can use for your music, I think it's harming a little bit um your freedom of like legal in the legal sense of what you can publish and not publish, right? And I think that's parasitical.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, you as for those of, if since I didn't introduce it before, you are a musician, you do make music, so I guess like intellectual property, patents aside, like you mentioned, music wise, how do you um, how do you view intellectual property aside from a theoretical aspect? How do you view it yourself
Okay,
to
so
your own
personally,
creation?
I've thought about this because like when I think about releasing music, I always get super scared about people copying my ideas and just saying that they're theirs, and there's no way for me to prove it. And also because I'm against intellectual property. But I think that the smart thing that people need to take into consideration is when you're releasing something, you're taking a risk, and you have you have the ability to release it or not release it. I think you must put all of your ability into thinking and reasoning what is most effective for you. You should market your release, your new song maybe, and then that can be evidence that it's yours, and that you made it. But if there is no intellectual property per se, another person could just take this and make another song that is much better than mine, just with my idea. Like it's a small idea, it's not even like the whole song, just like a small melody, like a small lyrics maybe, and they can use it and they can get all the credit, and I'm gonna get pissed, right? But like there's nothing I can do about it because they beat me at it. They were better than me at marketing, they were better at me than making the actual song, they're better than me distributing the album or the song, you know. So
Definitely.
it's something that has to do with tactics as well, with market tactics. You
And
by releasing stuff on the internet or just like on like like a record, you're essentially taking that risk, and you can decide to take it or not. I think.
definitely. No, I agree. And I think a point that I've heard a lot that I'm going to relate it back to music is that why do people like why would people pour so much strength like into in patents? Why would they pour so much energy into creating something if it's just going to get copied instantly and there's no legal protection against it, right? And I think that what we see through mathematicians, we see through theoretical scientists that they pour all their strength and energy, their whole life's work into uh, finding these equations, these these different discoveries, right? That haven't been found before, and they don't get patents or intellectual property. I believe that there is
I
one
actually
type
think
of
it's
view.
hypocritical from part of the government that they actually do pay patents, and they say that the vaccines are should be free and should be accessible to everyone. By actually making these patents, you're not allowing for like a large majority of the laboratories that don't have the formula to actually start making the vaccines and spread it even faster. So that's, I think, a problem, because like how can you say that you want to like get everyone vaccinated and make us safe, create a safe environment, if you're not letting other people and other companies use that and
And
paper
racking
to.
up the price as well through doing so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I guess like through what I was saying with math is that I mean it kind of brings back to your music argument that is that well people could build off of my music and people build off of scientists equation or mathematicians and scientists equations many times, right? And we don't see the mathematicians getting as mad, and I think that the the key to it is that it's not so much um, viewing it as oh how do I get to have I suppose an artificial monopoly on this intangible property for a certain amount of time, but rather what can I do with it? Like you again as a musician, most artists get their majority of revenue through live performances, right? Like they use this they use growing on the internet, going through discs and records, they use that to grow their audience and then make money on stage performances. And that doesn't necessarily include or rather that does include people that don't necessarily put lyrics into their music as well, like Skrillex comes to mind, right? Or Marshmello comes to mind, right? Who don't necessarily put in lyrics or their own voices, but they still manage to get a lot of money for these performances. And I think that the only argument that I could think of for intellectual property would be for people not like scientists, not like mathematicians and stuff like that, but rather for artists, right? And I think and I think that there are other ways to get back that money without forcing other people not to use their own property, you know?
And I think that also we just need to define property for a second. So, like, what do you think the definition of property is in the first place?
Well, okay, I believe that private property, what I believe that private property can also relate to the means of production, right? Like a factory or a business. But at the same time, I believe this is where I distinguish from Marxists and from a lot of people on the left, that I believe that private property is also the same as personal property. I believe it um, it spreads all the way from owning a factory, right, the means of production, to owning your cell phone, owning a book, right. I believe that a microphone. I believe that all those things are part of your private property, and intellectual property isn't, right, because if anything, it limits what you can do with your own property.
Right. So, also want to get into like, so you mentioned like a book or like for example your toothbrush or
Yeah,
just
yeah.
little things around your house. Are they you consider to being property? I do consider them to be property. I think property and possession are not. I mean, toothpaste can be property. It also can be possession. I think that there's a misconception when people think about property and possession. I think that property is your legitimate right to a certain object in movable or unmovable. By this, I mean like a fixed property, a fixed asset, such as a building. Another, like it could be like a current asset, such as money. That's also your property. It's your money. Like you have the legitimate access to that. However, when you're talking about possession, you can also not have legitimate access to that, but it's your possession because it's in your hands at the moment. It could be something stolen. You possess it, you have it, but it's not legitimate. That's
Or your
property.
property,
Exactly. That's I think
right.
where a lot of people just start in like it's a problem with Marxism, for example. Like if you can have any private property, the Marxists say, then how can you have your own toothbrush? Or how can you like why can someone not take your toothbrush, for example? Why can someone not take your objects? If they're like because possession is a lot, that's your property. Possession is just when you have something, right?
Hmm. And I believe that something that like you and I think um, I think most people on the economic right agree with, that left wingers do disagree with, is that private property, like I said before, for us conflates personal and what personal property and means of production, right? It's not private property and personal property, which the people on the left do differentiate. And well, they don't have private property and they have personal property. But I also think that there is I believe that there is an error in doing that, because what is private property as well, the reason capitalists are called capitalists is because they hold capital, right? And I think that capital
Right, right.
can,
But the whole like term capitalism was like I really don't like it. Like
me
I
either.
just think
Yeah,
like a critic
it would.
from
Yeah, it was.
right.
Yeah, I prefer
The
not
term
to.
wasn't used at all before Marx.
It,
Capitalism.
I think, yeah, Marx was not the first one to say it, but he was one of he was the one who popularized it. And the problem with capitalism, but also, so okay, so there are two definitions of capitalism: the one that has been thrown around the most nowadays, and the one that is mostly used by communists and leftists, which is, I would say, part of why the
Like when the bourgeoisie have the means of production and the
exactly.
proletariats.
I would say like that's why there is such a big difference. Like that is why there's such a big fight from communists to capitalists, not because they actually uh, like rather because they can't come to a conclusion on what it means, right? The communists believe that capitalism is the union of private property with the state, that it cannot exist without the state, while capitalists, or rather true capitalists, believe that capitalism is simply the private ownership of the means of production, right? Capitalism is simply the ability to hold private property with or without the existence of the state. It doesn't matter that the private property is there without assistance from the state, right? And I think that that's where it has nothing to do with the state, and I think that's where there's so much
Free market, you mean, right?
fighting. Yeah.
Free market, yeah. Okay. Right. Exactly. like that's also, for example, like, well, a lot of people don't identify as ANCAP, rather as like anarcho-capitalist, just identify as free market anarchists.
Or
Because like,
voluntarists. Yeah.
right? Oh, volunteers. I haven't heard that actually.
Yeah, that's the one I prefer to go as, because I feel like it talks more to the true side of anarcho-capitalism, which is that it's not so much based around holding capital as it is based around a voluntary society, right? And I think that's the importance of anarcho-capitalism or voluntarism. But also, I think another huge problem I have with the word capitalism is that it conflates people from the Chicago and Austrian schools, which are the free market schools of economic thought, and conflates them with the Keynesian school of economic thought, which is very statist in its creation, right? There's a very clear union of market and state, and I think that that is where there is such a big argument, because we cannot say that they are less capitalists than we are, right? They are capitalists. They are just they're just, I suppose, the capitalist Marx, closer to the way closer to the way Marx was describing when talking about capitalism, which was that there is a union between state and the private ownership of the means of production, and it's hard to people that are not Keynesians to say that isn't capitalism. So I think that's why people of the Chicago and Austrian school, people who are more laissez-faire market, like or laissez-faire markets, or pro that, should identify themselves as other things, right? Pro free market and property rights, and not capitalism. You know?
You believe that capitalism? I kind of agree with that, because capitalism, in that term, like what happened in like in the 1800s with Marx, what he was criticizing was corporatism. Actually, the aid of like the monarchies, the new governments, to the big companies that were providing everything, and the workers didn't have any other option. It was just until like the the 20th century, like with Wilsonian liberalism, that you finally have less government, and you have the American dream. You have the middle class being very happy, like having a stable life. You have all that, and the Wilsonian liberalism sticks more to like the Austrian school and kind of that ideology. And then from that, kind of like there's these other philosophers, politicians, just like try to depart less and less from the government, because like essentially all forms of like like ANCAP, monarchy, depart from Wilsonian liberalism rather than capitalism. If that makes
And
sense.
yeah, and I think as well, I love that you mentioned, I guess, the American dream and things like that. And obviously, we're not talking about social values, right? Like social values, they still had the whole civil rights movement to work out, and they had a lot of things that, by no standards, are they correct. And economic wise, they were definitely freer. I think um, I think it's something that we should aspire a little bit more. And I also know that there are, because I've had this argument before, a lot of people that will say, oh, but taxes were incredibly higher back then than they are now, which is not true. I believe compared to today, 2020 or 2021, I don't remember which year it was. I believe taxes in the 50s, which were the years of prosperity, were only around 4 to 6% more, I believe, income taxes per person. So there wasn't that much of a, or I don't know if per person. I don't know. I'll put the graph somewhere on the screen, but there was a. It's not that big of an increase back then, and they did have more freedom in ways of the market. And I think that's where a lot of the ideas that you and I ascribe to come from.
Definitely. Hey, I also want to talk about a little bit about the truest form of anarchism, if that's
Yeah,
okay. So, uh, we were actually having this talk before. Um, I was thinking about what is the actual, like the realist form, the most pure form of anarchism, and I think that I'm not sure if I disagree with Matthias here, but like I believe it's anarcho-individualism, and we had this talk earlier, and I think that anarcho-capitalism is essentially the truest form, but for the individual to choose the anarchy, because anarchy focuses
absolutely.
on like the freedom of the individual. I think that anarcho-individualism is primarily the main anarchy, because it's its center in economic terms. It's just a pure anarchy, like literally per se. You're not forcing anyone to follow a certain economic system because they can choose which economic system they use, and that is why I believe it's true anarchy. Because if you were to put someone on an ANCAP or force someone under ANCAP, then in the first place, just I mean, it wouldn't be not an anarchist, but you wouldn't have the you can't choose if you want to go communist, anarcho-primitivist, anarcho-syndicalist, or anarcho-capitalist. And if you get like people thrown into an anarcho-communist um, like society, then anarcho-communism, we talked about this earlier, isn't really anarchist. Nothing in the left is really anarchist if you think about it.
Yeah, I
Can't be.
mean, everything in I would say without hesitation that every ideology in the left of economics requires a certain form of coercion, right? It requires a certain form of coercion, whether it is from a minority, though usually, especially if we are talking about anarchy, it requires a coercion from the majority towards the minority or a group of people who may disagree with what is being done. So I think, yeah, I don't think I wouldn't consider any leftist ideology libertarian or and certainly not anarchist. And
So
yeah,
why do you think that ANCAP is the truest form of anarchism?
okay. So you said before. By the way, for those listening, from now on, I will refer to voluntarism, free market, anarchism, and anarcho-capitalism and ANCAP. They will all mean the same thing. They're terms used interchangeably. Free market anarchism is also used for a different type of anarchy, but for this podcast, we will be referring to free market anarchy as anarcho-capitalism. All right. So I think that voluntarism is the purest form of anarchy as it exists, because uh, I think that in order for people to really live free of unjust hierarchies and free a of of an authority that is not elected or chosen, right? An authority that can change things for people on a whim, right? I think that in order to live that life and lead to more uh, self-actualization of the people, which right now is very hard to do, I think that the way to do that is to allow people to live in a purely voluntary society. And I think a society in which you get to choose who you align yourself with, you choose where to live, you choose where to buy from, and you really have a choice in almost everything about your life. I think that is the truest form of anarchy. And there are a lot of people that are correct in saying that anarchy is inherently anti-capitalist. That is how it was formed as an idea. That being said, it attacks the form of anarchy that both Joaquin and I are also attacking, which is the union between state and and private property holders. So dismissing that, anarcho-capitalism uses the term capitalism in a completely different way, which is simply property rights and the private privately owned means of production. I think property rights allow people to really live a life free of unjust hierarchies, and so that's why I believe it's the truest form of anarchy. And you said,
Like,
yeah,
yeah. Sorry, you were saying?
oh yeah, no, I was saying, you mentioned before individualist anarchy and or anarcho-individualism and why that is, in your opinion, the truest form of anarchy. But I would also go as far to say that anarcho-capitalism or a free market anarchism is, if anything, also the truest form of anarcho-individualism, because I believe that the true form or the true way for someone to uh, be, I guess, an individual is a society that protects the individual over the collective, and that is exactly what
Wait,
voluntarism does.
what's that? Like, we need to like take a second to like explain kind of what are like what's the philosophy behind the anarcho-capitalism or like anarcho-communism, like the community versus the individual, like what is more important. I think that the individual is more important clearly, and we have talked about this because like when when a person lives their lives, their aim is to survive. Their aim is to provide to provide whatever it takes for them to achieve self-fulfillment, because human nature is irrational in a lot of senses, and they need to be self-fulfilled. I'm not an egoist, which means that the moral code should be defined by what somebody wants and that is accepted and justified. I'm not an egoist because I think that the moral code is rather established communally, but I think that following the NAP is a way of maintaining this peace amongst individuals by not aggressing towards each other.
Yes,
For
I would also like to explain, like just interrupt real quick. I'd like to explain for those listening. You probably heard the word or the word NAP. The NAP stands for the non-aggression principle, which in essence means anything that aggresses upon somebody, anything that does something to somebody without their consent is violating this non-aggression principle. This can be anything from murder to petty theft, to fraud, anything along those lines. Essentially, uh, lying or as in lying to the customer you're trying to sell something to, or as that can harm their property rights because they're spending their property rights on a lie, or murder, of course, or or I guess in my opinion, a more extreme case, it can be anything to rape. And the NAP basically describes anything that is aggression is uh, is bad, and hence the non-aggression principle. And for the purposes of the NAP is also created uh, talking specifically about government aggression or state aggression, which includes uh, recognizing taxes as a form of theft.
So I think that this is key because taxes, in a way, a lot of people don't realize that it's parasitical, or it's a lot of people just like live by thinking taxes are just like a normal thing you have to pay your state, but they don't really think twice about what it really is. I think that we also need to differentiate what a government is and a state is, because a lot of people don't know the difference. A state is an entity that has a monopoly of violence over a certain territory. And with that monopoly of violence, they establish power and they act parasitical towards the people living in the terrain. A government is an entity that functions within a state, or not even within a state, it's just like within a piece of territory, rather. And it can compete. But in the cases of like countries in the 21st century, it's usually involved and intertwined with the state. A government is, for example, uh, the system, the democratic system.
Yeah,
That's a government.
I would say like a better way to define it is the state is the institution itself, and government can usually mean two things. There are two definitions that people often use. Government can either mean the people in charge of the state at a given time, for example, Donald Trump's government or Joe Biden's government, things like that. However, government can also be used to mean a type of way in which people are organized. For example, democracy is a type of government, but not a type of state. Anarchy is a type of government, but not a type of state. Totalitarianism is a type of government, but not a type of state. And these require a certain level of state. For example, anarchy requires no state, or totalitarianism requires a super state. In democracy, relies a state composed of, well, depending indirect or direct, whether representatives of the people or the people themselves.
Okay, so usually, like in an ANCOM, you would have direct direct democracy, which is the problem because it's not really like the truest form of anarchy, as we mentioned. It's not like really state free. Direct democracy isn't really state free.
Yeah, I would say um, what it does, what anarcho-communism does is it creates a hierarchy of the majority to the minority. I think it definitely does what it's meant to do in putting the collective over the individual, but obviously, as someone who believes the individual is infinitely more important than the collective, I see this as a huge, in my opinion, crime. I also believe that Um, we're talking about, for example, a hierarchy in an anarcho-communist system. We are also talking about, for example, the communal council, right, which is the people that decide things inside inside a commune, who decide laws, or rather not laws, but punishments for people who break the laws. Laws are just determined by the people. That happens in every anarchy. But I believe that the communal council already creates an unjust hierarchy, because there might be people who did not want those people on the communal council who are still being subject to rules or punishments by them.
Great. I think that we agree upon that very clearly. I also want to move on a little bit and want to talk about human nature, because it's I'm actually doing philosophy IB, and unfortunately I'm not doing higher level, but I wish I would, but I would be doing 4 hires, and I don't think that's a very good idea. Although I think that human nature is one of the most interesting subjects, and we can really relate to anarcho-capitalism and politics, because every single ideology departs from an axiom, and what an axiom is a premise that is known as true to build upon an idea. So, for example, the axiom of anarcho-capitalism might be objectivism. A lot of people claim it's egoism. It's forms of um, philosophical truths that are used to build an ideology. So in human nature, there's actually three main views, and I'm not sure which one you specifically align with, but primarily we have, first of all, the idea that humans are inherently rational beings. What does that mean? It means that the main way for us to gain knowledge is through intellectuality and thought, and we arrive to the truth through reason, through logic and deduction. And this argues that humans are inherently rational, means that rationality is inseparable, is an inseparable trait from human nature. On the other hand, people claiming that humans are irrational creatures means that we are mainly driven by the unconscious forces inside of us. Like all the actions and thinking we do are consequences of our instinct and genetic potential and natural adaptation. And kind of like our like the rationalists claim that the information that we use fits our confirmation bias, and hence it's unreliable and we are not reasonable. And the third view is that we are blank slates. And what does this mean? It's a metaphor to describe the individuals uh, having not born without any inherent thought, that we don't have any human nature at all, and that everything that exists and everything that we gain, everything we think, our minds are shaped by external stimuli, which is also known as behaviorism, and that shapes the development as humans. A lot of people that think on the blank slate theory argue that empiricism, which is essentially just like gaining information through sensory experience rather than reasoning, and that the true form of knowledge in epistemology is just gaining this knowledge through our senses instead of our thought. That is the difference between empiricism and rationalism. So the blank slate theorists are usually empiricists.
Hmm.
So I kind of want to talk to what you think are humans, and why do you think it's relevant maybe to um, your ideology. So for example, myself, I actually believe that humans are irrational, although they have like they are mainly driven by their emotions and instincts. Although they have the ability to reason, throughout history we can see that humans haven't been really rational. Like you can see the wars, you can see everything that happens, you can see a state, you can see all of these things that we don't agree upon. If we were truly rational, then wouldn't we reach the same conclusion? So that is my observation.
I think I think, well, philosophy is not my strong suit. I don't know much about philosophy. But that being said, I think, um, correct me if I'm using this completely wrong. I would say I'm more of a stoic when talking about this. I believe
Right.
that humans can be rational creatures. I think we have shown throughout history that we can be, but it also takes a great amount of effort and strength to overcome traumas and emotions, which for the most part do make us irrational creatures. Every single little thing about our day affects our mood, right? Even if we don't notice it. I mean, just noticing things that change your day is hard enough, right? Usually there might be some big ones, but there are a lot of things throughout the day that you might not notice. And I think that our brain can be changed so quickly that while we tend to be irrational, I think that if you take the time to really appreciate the world around you and notice this, I think that you can become more and more rational. I don't know if we can ever be completely rational creatures, but I do believe we can make completely rational decisions, and I think we can do this again through mental strength. And yeah, I think it's something that we all need to do with our lives, to take a step back and think and think, and I guess use our strength to realize how can we how can we really do this in a good way without acting on my emotions.
Exactly. So do you think that the key to gaining this, like the key to gaining knowledge or just deriving to a conclusion is basically through reason, through being rational? That's how we reach truths, basically.
Yeah, I think we reach uh, truth through rationality, but I think we reach rationality through through mental strength.
Oh, you mean through emotions?
No,
Like
rather, so I believe that we are, I believe we are at the start, or rather at our base, I believe we are irrational creatures. But I also believe, so we are irrational creatures because of our emotions, because of our thoughts, and like
instinct. Yeah.
because of our instincts. But I believe that through our mental strength and fortitude, I believe we can overcome that to an extent and make rational decisions to come to truths.
Okay. Yeah. Totally. So I just want to talk a little bit about the Stoics you mentioned. So the Stoics are basically a group of philosophers on the initial stages of philosophy, even before the Enlightenment era, which was like during the Renaissance, even no, like a little bit after the Renaissance. The Stoics were initially, I believe, the Stoics were Greek, right?
Oh,
Like
yes, yes.
the
That's
Stoics had a Greek like the ancient Greece context, and their way of thinking was primarily derived from like uh I believe empiricism, if I believe I may be incorrect, but uh the Stoics believe that you could reinforce your thoughts through endurance and through a lot of um like let's say for example like Aristotle, he contrary to Plato, like these were completely different. Like Aristotle was, he believed in senses that are much more valuable, and Plato believed that reason which was much more valuable. And so here at the start we already see a division in what is the truth. And I think that the problem here is, if we are truly be able to be rational and use the same logic and then do maths and be logical, then wouldn't we at the end reach the same conclusion? Wouldn't we all be the same?
if
That's my
if we were
point of view.
rational.
Yeah, exactly. Because if we were born rational, and if we were rational and we had all the ability to be rational, then what is it that shapes us if it's
Hmm.
not reason?
Okay, I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here, because I believe, like with you, I also agree that humans are irrational, at least at our core. But I believe a way that could be argued is, for example, we could, while we might be rational creatures, what is rational for us might not be rational for someone else. Like our needs may be different than someone else's, so that might affect um, how we act differently. I, Again, I'm really just spitballing here, but I think I think that that might be a cause for it. Even if we are all rational creatures, even if we all come to the same conclusion, I believe that at our core we are still different people, not just because of how we act. Obviously, if we were all truly rational, we would all act the same in that manner, but rather in our existence as a whole, I believe that we we have different needs, and I think that's what makes us different, if we are rational.
Yeah, I also want to actually mention a really interesting fact that maybe you don't know about. So a
Yeah.
lot of the rationalist philosophers believe in God,
Hmm.
which is really interesting because a lot of people would say that faith, or in that sense, faith is not rational. And it's not. Faith is not rational. Faith is emotion wise. Faith is something
Irrational.
choose to believe in because there's no evidence. It's just a feeling. It's emotional,
Right.
right? So it's not reasonable. But okay, so personally, I'm an agnostic, right?
Yeah, same here.
I Okay, so however, I came up on this philosopher that's called Spinoza, and he claims of an interesting way of seeing God, which is really I found really enlightening. And well, he claims that God isn't really this individual that judges you, or this like from the Abrahamic God, like this person like up there in the skies that just tells you what's right or wrong, or like controls everything, or just like judges you like a person, like a bearded dude. No, like Spinoza thinks that God is the laws of the universe, nature, reality. All of that is God, and that God is essentially the reason why everything works the way it is. It's the universal constants, and I actually have come to be convinced by that because there is no way to prove God's existence, and there is no way to unprove God's existence. And God is essentially a perfect being, right? Like
Right.
in the case of like talking about theology,
Christianity.
yeah, Christianity, God is perfect, and essentially in a lot of religions as well, God is usually seen as perfect. So do you know what the ontological argument is?
Enlighten me.
Okay, so it's the most interesting thing I've ever heard how to prove God, like the existence of God. So the ontological argument says, let's say imagine a perfect island. Okay, a perfect island. It would be much more perfect if it were real, if you weren't imagining it, right?
Right.
Like the island would be much more perfect if it were there because it exists. It's much more. It's material. It exists. It's perfect.
Right.
So if things that exist are perfect and God is the most perfect being ever, God exists. That's essentially the ontological argument. I see a lot like a little bit of refutation problems with that because it's assuming a premise to be able to draw a conclusion. But I think that it's an interesting way of proving the existence of God and saying that everything can come from like a perfect being, and everything that is that even if it's Spinoza's God, like the laws of the universe that I mentioned, everything needs to come from perfection to be able to exist, right? So
Hmm.
I just found really interesting that. So can I ask you why are you agnostic?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess uh, I I was like my parents, my mother is a Catholic, my dad is a Lutheran, and I guess I was just raised, but not really with the presence of God. We went to funerals and weddings and stuff like that, but there wasn't really a presence. And then like I guess with stuff in my family, I never really I guess believed in God in that way. And my brother one day said he was an atheist, and I was like a first grader. So I was like, oh, now I'm an atheist too. And then, but I didn't know what that meant. I just knew it meant I don't believe in God, and I didn't believe in God, and I still don't. And I tried at one point, but the thing is, after some time, I realized is atheist really the right term? Because I mean, the whole point of being atheist is that I
Yeah,
can't.
because there's a difference between saying I don't believe in God and God doesn't exist.
Exactly. Like I believe that's like the major flaw with atheism is that its whole premise is I cannot prove God is real, therefore he isn't true. But at the same time, that it's completely destroying itself by the other side of the premise, which is I cannot prove God is not real, therefore God I cannot prove God is not real, therefore God does exist, right? So I think like that's why I think uh, agnosticism is such a great healthy middle because it's like I don't know if God existed. Like I don't know if he does or if he doesn't. I am just living here trying to be a good person, trying to live a good life. And if there is a God, then that's great. If there isn't, also great. Or I'm preparing myself for it. But I'm also not going to jump to conclusions if I don't know. I guess like the middle in the first place. I just know the questions.
Yeah, for sure. Also identify as agnostic, although I've been like enlightened by Spinoza and his ideas on like what it could be like a God, not in a conventional Catholic way, but just like thinking about what is perfect and how things are and why things are. And also like the causation, like what caused the Big Bang, like like where did like how did it start? Like a lot of people just say that, or I think the true question is, was it just like a repetition of things and it goes back into time and it's infinite, or
I
did
think
something start, or did something
okay,
start?
I'm gonna like, because okay, this is something that I find like mind blowing. So there's like there's already like two working scientific theories, like completely different theories on on the multiverse. Like there's a theory on the one that you said, like if the Big Bang, like is it just like a like an event, then throughout all of space and time there must be numerous Big Bangs, and if there is numerous Big Bangs, like, and because
There's
space time is
multiple
infinite,
universe. Yeah,
there's another universe just like ours. And that's one of the theories. But then another theory is another long one that I don't completely understand. But basically, they shoot an electron in the tube. I think it's based on Schrodinger's cat. Voice break, but based
yeah,
on
the light goes both ways at the same time.
exactly. So it's based that they shoot an electron down a tube, and if it spins, there's a 50% chance it'll go one way or the other. But when they actually do it, it's completely random. And the theory is that it is going both ways, but in another universe, like every time you do it, it splits, and in another universe, it's actually going in the opposite direction. So if both of these theories are true, and I am no scientist, but if these both of these theories are true, it's really interesting to think that there could be multiverses inside of multiverses, right? So in every multiverse, because there's infinite space time, there could also be infinite multiverses. So I find that really cool.
Totally. There's no way that we can prove that we have free will. Like we could just say that like we just determined to live by the way of the atoms or the way of the like how the matter moves. Like what I'm saying right now, I cannot prove it to be my free will. I can just like I can't prove that because I cannot compare it to another universe because we only live in this one and we can only experience this one. And so what if it's just like the fate that is deciding what I say and it's not really my free will, you know?
What if
Like can I
it's like,
really decide what's
yeah,
gonna happen? Oh, it
yeah.
also kind of links to the case you told me about teletransportation at one point. Like what happens if like in teletransportation is just like dying and then reappearing as another self, but no one knows you died, you know?
Wait, I'll explain it real quick. So it's the transportation. This is another, like, I guess, like theory that like if transportation, like teletransportation, is like transporting it's basically breaking you down cell by cell, atom by atom, and then shooting those atoms and then reconstructing them somewhere else, right? If it reconstructs you, what's to say that your what do you call it, like your consciousness travels through, right? I mean, your brain does, of course, it's reconstructed, but what's to say that your consciousness does? What if really what's going on is you're dying as as you're being teletransported, and I guess like being born again when you are reconstructed. So really, it would be, you would have the same memories, the same thought process, but it wouldn't be you. If anything, it would be like a cloning process. So I guess like it's a cool thought experiment, because essentially every time you would be teletransporting yourself, you would be killing yourself and reconstructing yourself, but you would never know you died. So there would be no way to prove this, and you could just keep going, keep going, keep going, and you would just keep on killing yourself. Your true self would be long gone, dead.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's fascinating. Also, I think we should move on to like
Yeah.
the American two-party system, right? I wanted to talk.
The what? Oh, the American two-party system. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I think that like a misconception that a lot of people think is that they usually say the Republicans are conservative and the Democrats are liberal, and that isn't really true. I mean, the supporters can be. The supporters are usually, um, and say like the stereotypical like people from like Texas or like just like you would say in Republicans, just like the people that vote for Trump, for
Or
example.
completely socially conservative, of course.
Exactly, completely socially conservative. And you have the social justice warriors, on the other hand, that are completely liberal, that vote for the Democratic Party. But Joe Biden's political chart is authoritarian right, and Donald Trump's political chart is authoritarian right.
I think.
they're both essentially corporatists.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that what's funny is that so I would say what Republicans like to pose themselves as is reactionaries, right? Like they like to pose themselves as like these ultra conservatives. We will bring back tradition. We will go back to the good old days and stuff like that. And
Yeah, like
while
the dream, like that sort of.
exactly, while the Democrats they tend to push for this, we want change. We really want progression and things like that. But I mean, if we were really talking about progression and we're really talking about things like this, then would you actually look at their policies, right? And their policies are not too different. I mean, Trump's and Biden's policies on immigration have not changed at all. Trump's and Biden's policies on demilitarization of the police have not changed at all. Trump's and Biden's policies on the war have not changed at all, right? We're still bombing the Middle East like it's no tomorrow. And I think, and I think that the fact that this has been going on for 20 years and that is crazy. I think the fact that no matter which president has been in office for the longest time, we have been in a war, right? Like I think no praise to Trump because I'm sure that he had no responsibility for this, but there was I mean Trump was like the first president in God knows how long that hasn't actually started a war, and I think that's crazy because it really like pushes to show how much Republicans and Democrats really love this pro-war agenda, right? They really push for this. They really push for this military.
Yeah, like all the presidents since Clinton, because I'm not that informed before Clinton, should go to jail.
I agree. I like
Like in our system, like I don't think a jail should exist, but let's say if they are putting like other criminals into jail, they must face their own like people what they say. Like they should be going to jail in that sense because they're committing war crimes, right?
definitely. I mean, let's see. I'm not going to go from Obama because I'm not too informed on beforehand. And what I do have informed on beforehand is conspiracy theories. I
Oh,
don't want to get
but Obama also had like a lot of
yeah.
fighting in the Syrian war, for
Yeah,
example.
that's why I'm going to start with Obama. Obama is a war criminal and deserves to go to jail. Trump has God knows how many allegations against him for sexual abuse and rape. Also should
Yeah.
go to jail. Biden,
No, not only that, but the whole thing with Russia, the whole I don't know if he
I'm not sure
like
that's the thing. Though. I'm not sure that the Russia thing was proven. Don't quote me on that. I know. I think I'm not so sure on that. I know a lot of other things that he did that I'm very much against, but I'm not so sure about that. So yeah, I don't know about that. But then look at Biden. Biden's policies are ridiculous. I mean,
Biden
it,
already like not even like 5 months into his like government, and he already committed a huge war crime. He already killed like the Syrian children and families. I think they're like that. I'm not sure they agree with Biden's policies, to be
not
honest.
just that. I think like I mean, it's so funny to me how he created the 1994 or 96 one of those crime bill, right? That basically targeted minorities and drug use within minorities that sent people to jail for a very long time for drug use and and just drug related crimes. And people said he had changed, right? People said he was like, oh no, he's changed. He's not pro that anymore. And he said, no, I'm here to change things. Now he's banning another drug. And I think the problem with this is that this is not just any drug, okay? Menthol cigarettes disproportionately are used by the black community, right? Which means that this will
What are you saying?
menthol cigarettes, which are flavored cigarettes.
What is that? Oh,
Uh,
flavor. Okay.
yeah, flavored cigarettes, like from mint cigarettes. So the main problem with this is that not only does this disproportionately affect not just minorities, but black people in general by huge numbers, it also, not just that, it also affects how these people will consume these cigarettes because they will continue to, right? And I think what we've seen from every single drug being banned in history is that the drug will continue to stay there and it will just get unhealthier and more expensive. And that's what we've seen with
Plus,
every
the
drug.
government will invest a lot of money into like waging a war against the drug.
Exactly. So basically, it'll just pour more money into the drug war and make the drug users way more unhealthy than they were originally. And I think
And it's gonna
that,
open up like terrorist gateways and networks that are dangerous.
yeah, and it just gives way more money and power to the cartels that are already so powerful, that exist down here in Latin America. And I believe as of right now, he has not banned menthol cigarettes. I believe it's on his plan. I really hope he doesn't, as I am a super pro drug person. I believe drug legalization is the way to make drug users be able to take drugs safer, and I believe it's the step for recovery, and it will also take down virtually every cartel in the world if the U.S. legalizes uh, their drug usage. So yeah,
Yep, I totally agree.
we strayed a little bit from there, but essentially, I guess like what I was trying to say is, whether you look at Trump or Biden, that or Obama or Bush, who I don't know much about, but I do know much about Reagan, right? They have very similar things, which are uh, gun control, anti-drugs, pro-war, and
Funding ISIS, funding the Al Qaeda.
funding ISIS. That was a nice one that Reagan did. But yeah, wait, no, it was Al Qaeda back then. He funded Al Qaeda,
Yeah.
but that's a nice one. Uh, and of course, also strong immigration policy, which I mean, again, Obama, Biden, and Trump, all three had strong immigration policies. I think people, what they love to do is, and that is the greatest harm of the two-party system, is that they are so polarized by these two parties, right? By Democrat and Republican, to generally believe that they are so far apart that the Republicans and the Democrats would never agree with each other. So it creates this mentality of, oh, Trump did this. Well, I mean, at least, oh, Trump did the same thing Biden did. Well, Biden did it more, or like that mentality of like, well,
Yeah, yeah, or
it
like
wasn't that bad when my candidate
my
did it.
president did it better just because it's Democrat. Like it's
Exactly, and it's a
like
huge
oh,
issue.
like there's this huge like misconception about people saying that like Trump gave like people jobs, and then like the Democrats will say, no, 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 it was Obama, or like no, 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 it was Clinton. Like they're all just rejecting the fact that something happened during the government. It's just crazy.
Yeah,
And Trump did give jobs. I don't agree with his ideology because he's protectionist and he's corporatist, but like he did give jobs, and the fact that people just reject that because he's Republican and just I really I can't believe how it is. Yeah.
exactly. And what's really funny to me is that you don't have to ask, what if the other party did the same policies? Like, we know that they do the same policies, and we know that nobody cares, right? We don't have, like, it's because I think at its core, Republicans will see, or I'm going to start off with Democrats because I think it's better that way. So Democrats will look at what people like Trump say, and what Trump says is, I'm more of a progressive person. I know you are more of a progressive person as well. But what we see is like Democrats capitalize on this because they see what Trump says, which are horrible things, and what the Republican Party says, which is more on conservative, which runs on conservative values. And they say, look at how dare they say these things. This is so bad. And then the Republican Party does the exact same thing for them, but for progressive values. So really, it just ends up like a Democrat telling to a Republican, dude, can you see how bad your candidate is? Because they're saying this. But the Republican believes that it's the opposite way around. And this social divide, this social belief divide, is only there to support the two-party system. I'm a strong believer that the Democrats and Republicans really need each other to survive, because they are not so different ideologically, right? Only socially. And I would even say that that's just for for parade reasons. But I think, like, because they're not so ideologically different, it really helps them to have such devoted, strong fan bases, because that means that people are too afraid and unwilling and passively accept not voting for the opposite party, or not the opposite party, but rather a third party, right? That's why the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Constitutionalist Party, has so few votes because people are like, oh no, no, I want to stick it to the Republicans. I want to stick it to the Democrats. There's no way the third party will ever win anyway. And I think that the two-party system really needs that. And I think they're not really enemies. They just really like pretending that they're enemies because that's what actually helps them in the long run.
That kind of also relates to our system here in Peru. That's, I think, even worse than the two-party system. Because there isn't even a system. It's just people saying, like, it's called, I don't know how to say it in English, but it's called caudillismo. It's just having um, like a person is a figure for an ideology. Like, the parties here in Peru are not ideological. They're just names that
They're
either
all populism, like every single one of them.
either that relate to Peru popular or free, or like you can see like Fuerza Popular, okay, popular, Acción Popular, PPC, yeah, Partido Peruano, tipo cristiano.
Avanza
It's
país.
Avanza País, Avanza, like Peru Libre, like you see, in Peru Libre, it's nothing that has to do with freedom. Libre is like freedom, right? And Peru Libre is communist, and not even communist. It's
Marxist.
socialist.
Yeah, it's Marxist
But it's not
Leninist.
even Marxist because like they believe in a state.
Yeah, well, no, that's why. Like they're Marxist Leninist. They're so more on
Yeah,
the socialist
they're
side. They're it's crazy to me that that
like
they
30% of Peru is going to vote for Castillo at this point.
yeah,
How? One third. One of like, if we meet up with three people, one of them is going to vote for Castillo. Like I just think it's unbelievable.
it doesn't
Really.
surprise me though. Like it really doesn't surprise me though. Like
How?
because
Like, where did the communist
because
movement
because
came
because they're not
from?
because they're not well, I mean the communist movement has been really big here for a long time. It's just been like underground, but they're not voting for them because they're communists. They're voting for them because Castillo actually talked to them. I mean, every party politically for like the past 200 years, except for Fujimori and Velasco, which funnily enough had completely opposite viewpoints on the economy. Every single party and every single election, except for those two, have, or rather candidates, except for those two, have completely ignored the people in the rural areas, the people in the lower class, the middle class. And so because every single candidate has completely ignored them, especially in the campaign process, and ignored their existence, and they've never given them education or things like that, they always end up feeling, I guess, like not isolated, but rather ignored, right? And they're still, and they're ignored legally.
You think the majority of Castillo voters are from like provinces instead of like the capital here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right, exactly. Because these people really feel ignored. They've never been talked to before. They have never seen anybody who genuinely cares about them. And the thing is, Velasco, he was not a democratic candidate. He was just a dictator, but he did quote unquote care about the workers, which is why a lot of workers today, still to a certain degree, I guess, appreciate what he did, or create apologism for the reforma agraria. And I think, for example, with Fujimori talk. Well, I mean, obviously after he got out of office because of all the stuff he did, not anymore. But
Also, like, he's a dictator, like he's low-key dictator. So
it's funny how the two dictators that have gotten here have arrived here through populism. But he actually was, I mean, back when he was running, he was known as El Chino. He was known as the guy from del pueblo, right? Like he was known as the guy. He was the little guy, right? He was the little guy that was speaking for the people. He was the little guy that everybody was
I think
like,
it was, I think Vargas Llosa also like
Vargas Llosa, dude, I mean, Fujimori just copied Vargas Llosa's plan, like word for word, and used it.
really.
Yeah.
I think Vargas Llosa wasn't Vargas Llosa like leftist.
No, 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 dude. All of Fujimori's plans were Vargas Llosa's. My mom actually worked with Vargas Llosa because my grandfather used to be really good friends with Vargas Llosa, and
Oh,
yeah. So in that campaign, they the thing is, Fujimori had no plans. Like he generally had no plans. He was just the guy from El Chino del Pueblo, and everybody loved him. Why? because he was the guy that they could relate to. He was the guy that was actually speaking to the people. He was the guy that in the ads was sitting on a tractor. He was the guy in normal clothes, just smiling, right? And that's why people loved him. And then when he got in office, he used Vargas Llosa's plan. Vargas Llosa got really mad and never has come back to this country ever. He left to Spain. So, but it's funny how Fujimori and Velasco both appeased to the people, and now we're seeing Castillo do it
No
again.
one, no one saw Castillo coming. No
And
one saw.
nobody saw Fujimori coming either. It's crazy because like we always say these things. We say like there's no way this guy's gonna win. They said that with Fujimori too. There's no way this guy's gonna win. The people want him to win. He can win. Because Castillo has been all around the country, like all around the
Yeah,
country to all the areas that
winning the elections is not like here in Peru, especially. It's not about giving the best plan, just getting the most people to like you,
exactly,
right?
exactly. That's why it's not about communism. At least um, Castillo doesn't know what communism is. I highly doubt it because when you
No,
see him
he
speak,
doesn't even know what a monopoly is. So how can he?
exactly, his party knows was. I
Yeah,
would like to say
in his
his
government plan, he quotes, he says that he took inspiration from Venezuela and Cuba. Like,
exactly. But here's the thing: his party knows what communism is, or rather, what Marxism
Cerrón,
Leninism is. His
Cerrón,
party does, but he doesn't.
Cerrón,
What?
like says Cerrón, Cerrón, like
Exactly.
pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
he
he's
knows what
like
communism is.
investigating corruption. Yeah,
I
he's
mean, obviously, he's a Marxist Leninist, which, in my opinion, is the worst type of communist. But the thing is, he knows what he's talking about, Cerrón. But Castillo doesn't, and that's his charm. In a sense, I think Castillo is not a guy of politics. He's a guy of the people, right? And that's what people love about him. And I think I don't know if he's going to win. I genuinely don't know if he's going to win. But I think that if he does, it won't be as unexpected as people think. And also think that I used to be really worried, and to an extent, I'm still worried, but I'm not as worried as I was before because I acknowledge that Fukimori also had no plan. Like Fukimori did not know exactly what to do. And yet, I mean, well, his government was not exactly good, but it was not catastrophic in the sense that we are thinking now, in the way that people are posting Instagram stories now, that are saying we're all going to live in the streets, we're all going to be completely poor. I don't think that's going to happen. I
I
used to
don't think
think so.
Congress is going to let it because the Congress, like, like here in Peru, we have like like to get out laws and stuff that will happen. The Congress needs to approve, and if the Congress does like the majority isn't doesn't agree upon the what the people like want to change, it's not going to change. So it doesn't boil down to the poder ejecutivo. It boils down to the poder legislativo on what is going to
Mm.
happen.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he can. Like I don't know. I don't know if he can win, but I think, and obviously, I mean, as a voluntarist, as a free market anarchist, he like his at least what is written on the paper that he turned in definitely scares me. It scares me a lot, but um, it's not like like other people saying how could he have won? How would he have won? Or not how well how could he have fasted the second round? And how could he be so high in the polls? I I I don't know, man. Like we've neglected the low and middle classes for hundreds of years. Like what did you expect?
When
Of
everyone
course
just
they're
talks
pissed.
about like improving stuff or like giving their propuestas, it's just about Lima in
Yeah,
reality.
that's my problem with democracy, or that's my problem with democracy, and that's why, despite me not liking the two-party system in the U.S. at all, I think the electoral college works better than it does than a system like this one, because a system like Peru is proof that people will only campaign and get and promise things and fulfill promises to the capital or to the places with the most people. And that's what we have been. 1/3 of the population lives here, dude. We have only ever heard politicians campaign here. And the one time Castillo campaigns outside to a place that has been ignored and lied to, and by the way, uneducated for a very long time, he wins all the votes. Of course, this was
I
going to
mean,
happen.
there's 20 million people in Peru that have been like neglected and not taken like in importance. Like a lot of people just don't care. 20 million, that's two thirds.
Exactly.
No surprise really. Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, I think I we should probably get going in a second.
Yeah. 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 Is there anything else you would like to add or say anything?
Um, no, just like in general, I just enjoyed having like this like related topic being like being able to combine philosophy and politics together because they really shouldn't be separated into two things because
Yeah.
they kind of like what you think in reality is based on your set of morals.
I think,
Like,
yeah, I mean, as someone like, because you are way more philosophically inclined than I am. Like, I'm not a very philosophical person, and I think, I agree with you. I definitely do think that there is a connection between the two, and that they have to be, they shouldn't be viewed separately. And I think that's a mistake that I make. But I think like I guess like talking to you and having somebody that does know a lot about philosophy also give me insights on philosophy also really helps. So I guess thank you a lot for your input on philosophy, on intellectual property, on capitalism, on U.S. politics, on Peru politics, and and thanks for coming on.
of course, it was a pleasure. I love the podcast. I hope everything goes well. Yeah.
Thanks, man, and yeah, thanks for coming over. I'll send you the link once I'm done. Thanks for coming.